They thought locking an 11-year-old kid out in a freezing storm was the ultimate power move. They genuinely believed they were untouchable, sitting safe and warm inside their comfortable living room, drinking hot tea while my little girl shivered on the concrete porch for 5 agonizing hours. When my mother and my golden boy brother finally opened that door, looked me dead in the eye, and laughed while saying they changed the locks and we were out on the streets, they expected a total meltdown. They expected me to fall to my knees, beg for mercy, and plead for a roof over my child's head. But I did not give them that satisfaction. I just held my freezing, sobbing daughter tightly against my chest, looked at their smug faces, and said one single word: understood. What those fools did not know was that the very house they were kicking me out of did not belong to them. It belonged to me, and the storm they forced my daughter to endure was truly nothing compared to the profound hurricane of destruction I was about to bring down on their pathetic lives. My name is Harrison. I am 35 years old, and I am a single father to the most incredibly smart, kind, and resilient 11-year-old girl on this entire planet, Delaney. For my career, I manage massive underground construction projects. I am the guy they send down into the dirt, the noise, and the claustrophobic darkness to build subway extensions and utility tunnels. I am entirely used to intense pressure. I am used to solving complex, dangerous problems deep below the surface of the city where a single mistake can cost lives. You learn to stay calm when millions of tons of earth are suspended above your head. You learn to breathe through the stress. But I can say with profound certainty that the most toxic, suffocating, and dangerous environment I have ever had to navigate was not a collapsing tunnel made of mud and steel. It was my own home, or rather, the home I regrettably shared with my mother, Cora, and my older brother, Sullivan. Growing up in that house, I was the invisible child. I was the ghost who only materialized when something needed fixing, when a heavy box needed lifting, or when someone needed a convenient scapegoat. Sullivan, on the other hand, was the golden boy. He was the center of the universe. The sun rose and set on his every move, even though what he mostly did was fail spectacularly at everything he attempted. He is 32 years old now, constantly bouncing from one ridiculous get-rich-quick scheme to another, leeching off our mother, while I built a very stable, highly demanding career from the ground up. To truly understand the sheer level of disrespect and humiliation I tolerated for years, you have to look closely at the museum of pain my mother carefully curated over the decades. I remember every single exhibit in vivid detail. Let us start with Exhibit A. My 18th birthday. I had been working 2 grueling minimum wage jobs, flipping burgers and hauling bricks in the summer heat, to save up for a heavily used, rusted-out pickup truck so I could get to community college. That very morning, Cora threw a massive, lavish party. But it was not for me. It was for Sullivan because he had just graduated from a basic 2-year college program on his 3rd attempt after dropping out twice. She stood up in front of all our relatives in the backyard, gave a tearful speech about how proud she was of her brilliant boy, and handed him the keys to a brand new $30,000 car. The crowd clapped. I sat in the corner, eating a stale piece of store-bought sheet cake. When everyone finally left, I quietly walked up to her and asked if she remembered it was my birthday. She sighed, rolled her eyes as if I was bothering her, reached into her expensive leather purse, and handed me a crumpled parking ticket Sullivan had gotten the week before. She told me to pay it because I was the one working 2 jobs and clearly had more disposable income than her poor, stressed-out college graduate. Exhibit B is a much more recent addition to the collection. Family dinners. Just last month, I went to the premium butcher downtown and spent a significant amount of money on top-tier, dry-aged steaks to celebrate Delaney making the honor roll at her middle school. She had studied so hard, staying up late with flashcards at the kitchen table, and she earned a proper celebration. I fired up the grill and cooked those steaks perfectly. I even set aside the thickest, most perfectly marbled cut specifically for my daughter. I put it on a warm plate and left it on the counter while I grabbed the side dishes. When I turned my back for just a moment, Cora walked into the kitchen. Without a word of hesitation, she took Delaney's steak, swapped it, and slapped it onto Sullivan's plate in the dining room. She left a thin, charred end piece on Delaney's plate. When I confronted her, she looked at me like I was insane. She claimed Sullivan needed the protein more because he was stressing over his latest startup idea, which consisted of him sitting in his pajamas playing video games until 3 in the morning. She told me Delaney was just a kid and would not know the difference anyway. And then there is Exhibit C. The words. The unforgivable things you can never unhear once they hang in the air. I walked into the kitchen late one night to grab a glass of water. I heard Cora whispering to Delaney in the dark living room. My mother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect her grandchild, looked my sweet, innocent girl right in the eye and told her she was a heavy financial burden. She told an 11-year-old child that the only reason her dad could not get ahead in life, the only reason we lived in that house, was because he had a kid dragging him down like a ball and chain. I saw the light leave my daughter's eyes right then and there. I almost lost my mind that night. I almost tore the kitchen cabinets off the walls and shattered every plate in the house. But I stayed. I swallowed my pride. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted metallic blood. Why? Because I was holding onto a massive, life-altering secret. 5 years ago, Cora's terrible financial decisions finally caught up with her. She had remortgaged the house twice to fund Sullivan's failed ventures. The bank was just days away from foreclosing on the family home. She was weeping on the living room floor, utterly terrified of losing her social standing and her precious house. So I stepped in. I took $450,000 of my own hard-earned savings, money I bled for in the tunnels, and I bought the house directly from the bank. But I did not put it in my personal name. I bought it under a limited liability company that I solely control. Cora was so relieved she did not even ask to read the paperwork. She convinced herself and everyone in our extended family that I merely paid off a debt for her and was now just paying her rent to live in her house. She genuinely believed she was still the owner, the queen of the castle, and I intentionally let her believe it. Kept the peace. Kept a roof over Delaney's head. I let them live in that pathetic illusion of power. Until the day Sullivan's new fiancée showed up, and their collective greed finally crossed a line I could no longer ignore. I was ready to watch their world burn, but I had to be patient. I had to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Her name was Blair. She was a walking, talking nightmare wrapped in heavily branded designer clothes she definitely could not afford on her own meager salary as a part-time receptionist. The very moment Sullivan foolishly proposed to her with a ring that looked way too expensive for a man with zero steady income, the entire dynamic in the house shifted from casually toxic to openly, aggressively hostile. Blair marched through the front door acting exactly like the lady of the manor, despite the fact that she had never paid a single dime for a mortgage payment, a utility bill, or even a bag of groceries in her entire life. It started with small, irritating things designed to test the boundaries. My favorite coffee mugs, the ones Delaney bought me for Father's Day with her own allowance, were suddenly thrown into the trash because they did not match Blair's minimalist beige aesthetic. The household Wi-Fi password was abruptly changed without telling me, because she wanted to dedicate all the bandwidth to her daily reality television streaming sessions and video calls with her bridesmaids. When I tried to do my accounting work for the construction firm, I was blocked out of my own network. But I ignored it. I kept my head down, reconnected through my mobile hotspot, and focused entirely on providing a stable environment for my daughter. Then, Blair made the fatal mistake of setting her sights on Delaney. I came home from a brutally exhausting 12-hour shift deep underground, my boots caked in thick gray mud and my back aching from lifting steel supports. I walked up the stairs, hoping for a quiet shower and a warm meal. Instead, I found Blair standing right in the middle of Delaney's bedroom, holding a bright yellow tape measure. My daughter was sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching her school backpack to her chest, looking utterly terrified and small. I stepped into the doorway, blocking the exit, and calmly asked what exactly was going on. Blair did not even have the common decency to look me in the eye. She just casually jotted a number down in her leather-bound notebook and declared that this room had the best natural light in the entire house. She proudly announced that she and Sullivan had decided they were going to tear down the walls and turn my daughter's bedroom into a massive custom walk-in closet for all her upcoming wedding gifts and her extensive seasonal wardrobes. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was suffocating. I looked at Blair and told her, very clearly, to pack up her tape measure and get out of my daughter's room immediately. That is exactly when Sullivan strutted down the hallway, his chest puffed out, acting like the lord of the realm defending his queen. He marched right up to me, pointed a finger directly in my face, and sneered. He said, "This is Mom's house, Harrison. She is leaving it to me in the will. You are just a tenant here. You are a charity case that Mom took pity on. Mom says you need to pack up your stuff, pack up the kids' stuff, and move down to the unfinished basement so Blair can have the space she rightfully deserves for her bridal preparations." Cora walked up right behind him, nodding her head in that blind, sycophantic way she always did when Sullivan spoke. She looked at me with this incredibly pathetic expression of fake sympathy, tilting her head and sighing deeply. "Harrison, sweetie, you are just a single dad. You guys can live anywhere, you do not need much space. Sullivan is starting a real family now. He needs the room to grow. You should be a good brother and be happy for him. Do not be so selfish. The basement is perfectly fine if you put down some rugs." My blood boiled in my veins. The sheer audacity of these parasites was staggering. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. I wanted to reach into my work briefcase, pull out the pristine, notarized deed to the house, slap it as hard as I could on the kitchen counter, and watch their smug jaws detach and hit the floor. I wanted to throw them out into the street right then and there, and change the locks on them. But then I looked over at Delaney. She had her massive midterm exams coming up in exactly 2 weeks. She was already so incredibly stressed, studying every single night until her eyes were red. She had been crying over her math textbook just the night before. Ripping the rug out from under this family right now, initiating a formal legal eviction, would mean calling the police, enduring endless screaming matches, hiring movers, and creating utter chaos in the house. I could not put my kid through that kind of severe psychological trauma right before the most important tests of her school year. I took a deep, shaky breath. I clenched my fists inside my jacket pockets so hard my knuckles turned entirely white and my fingernails dug deep into my palms. I forced myself to maintain a neutral expression. I looked Sullivan dead in the eye and told him we would absolutely not be moving into the damp, moldy basement, but I would start looking for a new apartment after the month ended. I told them to leave the room as it was for now. I was intentionally giving them a grace period. 1 month. 1 month for my kid to finish her exams in complete peace, and then I was going to quietly serve them legal eviction papers and sell the entire property out from under them while they slept. I had the power to destroy them, but I chose restraint for my daughter's sake. Have you ever had to bite your tongue, swallow your pride, and eat dirt just to protect your child's peace of mind? Let me know down in the comments because it is the hardest thing a parent can do. I thought I could easily manage the situation. I thought I could keep the fragile peace for just a few more weeks by staying out of their way and working extra shifts. But their bottomless greed and cruelty could not wait. And the day they recklessly decided to take matters into their own hands, the sky turned as black and ugly as their souls. What would you do if your own family turned your home into a war zone and made your child the primary target of their hostility? It was a Tuesday, a spectacularly cold, miserable Tuesday in late October. The local weather forecast had been warning everyone for days about a massive storm front rolling in off the eastern coast, bringing freezing, torrential rain and bitter winds that cut right to the bone. The kind of rain that turns the streets into rivers and makes the air feel like tiny shards of ice. I was scheduled for a critical, highly sensitive 6-hour inspection deep inside the city's newest subway extension project. That meant 6 solid hours surrounded by thick concrete, heavy steel, and deafening tunnel-boring machinery, hundreds of feet below the surface of the earth. 6 hours with 0 cell phone reception, completely cut off from the outside world. Delaney always took the regular school bus home. She usually arrived right around 3 in the afternoon, dropping her bags in the hallway and grabbing a snack. She had texted me earlier that day during her lunch break, saying her phone battery was critically low at 2% because she forgot to plug it into the charger overnight. I quickly texted her back, telling her I loved her, to put her winter hood up, and to go straight home and get warm the second she got off the bus. I told her I would be home by 6 with a hot pizza. When Delaney walked up our long concrete driveway, the storm had fully arrived. The rain was coming down in thick, blinding sheets. The wind was howling, snapping the dead branches of the oak trees in the yard and sending wet leaves plastered against the sides of the house. She ran up the slippery steps to the front porch, her small shoulders shivering uncontrollably under her thin autumn jacket, and pulled her familiar brass house key out of the front pocket of her backpack. She shoved it into the lock and tried to turn it. It jammed instantly. She pulled it out, wiped the freezing rain from her eyes with her wet sleeve, and tried again, pushing harder this time, thinking it was just stuck. It did not fit. The entire locking mechanism was completely brand new. It was a shiny, modern silver metal that stood out starkly against the old, weathered white wood of the front door. Panic started to set in. She knocked loudly. No answer. She balled up her little fists and pounded on the heavy wooden door as hard as she could, calling out for her grandmother. Nothing. She walked over to the large front bay window and peered through the rain-streaked glass. The massive television in the living room was glowing brightly. She could clearly see Cora and Sullivan sitting comfortably on the plush leather couch. They were drinking hot tea from my favorite mugs, laughing at whatever comedy special was playing on the screen. She banged her hands on the window glass, screaming for them to let her in. Sullivan casually turned his head. He looked right at her. He looked right at my freezing 11-year-old daughter standing in a raging storm, made direct eye contact through the glass, and then slowly reached out and pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut. My 11-year-old daughter was standing in a freezing, violent downpour, and her own flesh and blood intentionally and maliciously ignored her. An entire hour passed. Delaney huddled herself into a tight ball under the very small, heavily leaky overhang of the front porch. Her clothes were soaked through to her skin. Her favorite purple backpack, full of her expensive school books and homework, was ruined by the water pouring off the gutters. Then, a sleek silver car pulled into the driveway. It was Blair returning from a bridal boutique appointment. Delaney stood up quickly, her teeth chattering so violently it physically hurt her jaw. She stepped out into the rain and called out to Blair, begging her to please open the door and let her inside just to warm up. Blair stepped out of the driver's side of her car, immediately popped open a massive, oversized designer umbrella, and looked down at my freezing, terrified child. Blair did not offer to share the umbrella. She did not offer a comforting word. She just rolled her eyes dramatically, muttered something under her breath about desperately needing a hot bubble bath after dealing with incompetent tailors, quickly unlocked the new deadbolt with a shiny new key, stepped inside the warm house, and slammed the door shut in Delaney's face. Delaney could clearly hear the heavy metallic click of the deadbolt engaging over the roaring sound of the storm. 1 hour of waiting turned into 2. 2 agonizing hours turned into 5. 5 full hours of freezing, relentless rain. 5 hours of my little girl crying alone on a cold concrete porch, feeling utterly abandoned by the people who were supposed to be her family, while they sat inside just feet away in the warmth. Down in the dark tunnels, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding above me, I finally finished the grueling structural inspection. I meticulously checked every load-bearing pillar, signed off on the thick stack of safety paperwork, packed my heavy gear into my duffel bag, and took the slow, clanking construction elevator back up to the surface. The very second my heavy steel-toed boots hit the wet street-level pavement and my phone finally caught a cellular signal, it began vibrating violently in my hand. It was a relentless barrage of notifications. 14 missed calls. Every single one of them was from a landline number I recognized instantly. It was Mrs. Higgins, our incredibly sweet, 80-year-old next-door neighbor. My heart stopped in my chest. A cold, suffocating dread washed over my entire body, a chill far colder than the rain falling heavily around me. I dialed the number back instantly, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone in a puddle. What I heard on the other end of that line changed me forever and sealed the fate of the people living in my house. I broke every single speed limit and traffic law in the city getting back to that suburban neighborhood. I gripped the steering wheel of my truck so hard my hands cramped, my knuckles white, my jaw set like stone. I did not even bother pulling into the driveway. I threw my heavy truck into park right on the front lawn, tearing up deep tracks of mud and grass, and sprinted full speed toward Mrs. Higgins' house, leaving my truck door hanging wide open in the pouring rain. I burst through her front door without even knocking, yelling my daughter's name. And there, sitting in the middle of a warm, floral-patterned living room, was Delaney. My beautiful, smart, infinitely resilient little girl was wrapped tightly in 3 heavy, hand-stitched quilts, huddled right next to a glowing orange electric space heater. Her lips were a terrifying shade of blue. Her skin was ghastly pale, devoid of color, and she was shaking so uncontrollably that the ceramic mug in her hands was rattling loudly. Mrs. Higgins was standing beside her, holding a hot mug of chicken broth to Delaney's lips, glaring furiously out her side window at my house. The elderly woman turned to me, her voice trembling with rage, and told me she had just gotten home from visiting her sister in the next town over and found Delaney huddled in a tight, unresponsive ball against our front door, thoroughly soaked and barely conscious. I dropped heavily to my knees on the carpet and wrapped my arms around my daughter, burying my face in her wet hair. I could feel the ice-cold dampness radiating from her body. Felt like holding a block of ice. She slowly looked up at me, heavy tears welling in her exhausted, bloodshot eyes, and whispered in a raspy, broken voice, "Dad, they changed the locks. They saw me out there." Sullivan looked right at me, but they shut the curtains. Blair walked right past me. Something deep inside my soul snapped right then and there. It was not a loud, explosive, fiery snap. It was eerily quiet. It was the distinct, irreversible sound of every last drop of familial obligation, every single ounce of pity, and every shred of forgiveness dying instantly. I kissed Delaney softly on her freezing forehead, promised her she was safe now, and that no one would ever hurt her again, and slowly stood up. My vision narrowed. The world around me felt entirely muted. I walked out of Mrs. Higgins' warm house and marched across the muddy lawn toward my property. The freezing rain was still falling heavily, soaking my work clothes, but I did not feel a single drop of it. I was numb to the physical world. I walked up the wooden steps to my front porch and did not even bother knocking on the door. I lifted my heavy steel-toed work boot and kicked the wood. I kicked it with every ounce of strength and bottled-up rage in my body. The impact was so massive that the thick wood splintered violently around the new deadbolt, and the decorative glass pane in the center of the door cracked from top to bottom with a sickening crunch. The door swung violently open, bouncing off the interior hallway wall, and there stood Cora and Sullivan. They initially looked shocked and slightly terrified by the sheer violence of my entry, but they quickly masked their fear with their usual smug, insufferable arrogance. Cora let out a loud, mocking laugh. She dramatically crossed her arms over her expensive cashmere sweater, looked me up and down with profound disgust, and said, "We changed the locks, Harrison. You and your brat are finally out. Sullivan needs this house for his future family, and I am tired of you living off my endless generosity. It is time for you to grow up and get your own place." Sullivan immediately stepped up beside her, smirking like a pathetic schoolyard bully who thought he had finally won the grand prize. He puffed out his chest, pointed at me, and sneered, "Your crap is in black garbage bags out in the detached garage. Take your kid and get the hell off my property. You are done here." They just stood there, waiting for the massive explosion. They desperately wanted me to scream. They wanted me to throw punches so they could call the police and play the terrified victims. They wanted me to fall to my knees and beg for just a few more nights in the basement. They wanted the deep, sickening satisfaction of watching me break down in front of them, admitting defeat. I looked at my mother, the woman who actually gave birth to me. I looked at the older brother I had quietly protected and financially supported for decades while he ruined his own life. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of love for these two people, and I found nothing but a hollow, freezing void. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I did not shed a single tear. I simply stood up straight, locked eyes with Cora, my voice deadly calm and devoid of emotion, and said, "Understood." I did not wait for their reaction. I turned sharply on my heel, walked back across the lawn to Mrs. Higgins' house, gently picked up my exhausted daughter, thanked our neighbor profusely for saving her life, and carried Delaney to my truck. We drove straight downtown to the most expensive, luxurious hotel in the city. I marched up to the front desk, threw down my premium credit card, and booked their biggest penthouse suite for an entire week. I ordered Delaney absolutely everything she wanted from the room service menu, and I ran her a deep, steaming hot bubble bath to finally melt the ice in her bones. As we had driven away from the neighborhood, I saw Cora and Sullivan watching us from the living room window, probably high-fiving each other and congratulating themselves on a flawless, easy victory. They slammed the broken door shut, truly thinking they had finally won the war. They did not know that my simple, quiet word, understood, was actually the binding signature on their total financial and social death warrant. The luxury hotel suite was incredibly warm, quiet, and safe. The private on-call doctor that the hotel concierge provided had come and gone within the hour. He thoroughly examined Delaney, checking her vitals, listening to her lungs, and confirmed that while she was severely exhausted and chilled entirely to the bone, she was thankfully avoiding pneumonia. Once she finally ate a massive plate of warm macaroni and cheese and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, safely tucked into the massive, fluffy king-sized bed, I quietly walked out to the expansive living area. I poured myself a glass of ice water, opened my secure work laptop, and prepared to go to war. I did not call the local police right away. Calling the cops for an illegal lockout would have gotten us legally back into the house that very night. Sure. But it would have been a messy, chaotic domestic dispute. Cora would have hysterically cried fake tears to the officers. Sullivan would have lied through his teeth, claiming it was a simple misunderstanding about the keys. It would have been a temporary, chaotic band-aid on a gaping wound. I did not want a band-aid. I wanted a surgical amputation of these people from my life. I picked up my phone and called Montgomery. He is the highly paid, aggressive corporate attorney who legally manages my limited liability company. He is sharp, ruthless, and he hates arrogant injustice just as much as I do. I told him every single detail of what had just happened. The illegally changed locks. The 5 hours my daughter spent freezing in the rain. The blatant refusal to grant her entry by multiple adults residing in the home. Montgomery was dead silent on the line for a long moment. Then he sighed deeply and said, "Harrison, give me exactly 2 hours. Let me pull the current property records, check the municipal filings, and see if these idiots have done anything else exceptionally stupid while pretending to legally own the place." I paced the length of the hotel room like a caged animal. I drank 3 massive cups of strong black coffee, staring out the window at the city lights, waiting for the sun to come up. When my phone finally rang, Montgomery sounded almost giddy with destructive excitement. "Harrison, you are honestly not going to believe what I just found," he said, tapping rapidly on his keyboard in the background. He had run a deep, comprehensive background check on the property deed and Sullivan's recent financial activities across multiple banking institutions. He discovered a specific number that made my stomach turn with profound disgust. $150,000. Sullivan, in his infinite staggering arrogance and sheer stupidity, had somehow managed to expertly forge Cora's signature and take out a massive, fraudulent home equity loan against the house for $150,000. He had told the shady online lender it was for a revolutionary new tech startup. But Montgomery's forensic accounting contacts quickly found out the money went straight to paying off massive underground sports gambling debts and buying Blair a ridiculously oversized, custom diamond engagement ring. Cora had no idea this loan existed. She genuinely thought her golden boy was a genius entrepreneur securing venture capital. And Sullivan, being a complete idiot, thought the house was legally in Cora's name. So he assumed he was perfectly safe using her identity as collateral. He had no clue that my corporate LLC held the actual, legally binding deed to the property. "They played right perfectly into our hands," Montgomery said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "By changing those locks. Without notice and locking out a minor child, they broke every single clause of the implied tenant agreement. And with this forged, fraudulent loan document now permanently tied to the property address, we have immediate, unshakable legal grounds for swift, catastrophic action." We spent the next hour aggressively drafting a heavily weaponized, 72-hour emergency eviction notice. We did not file it as an angry family member having a dispute. We filed it as the faceless, ruthless corporate entity that legally owned the structure. We officially cited illegal modification of the property, severe child endangerment, and massive suspected financial fraud. If you were in my shoes, sitting alone in that quiet hotel room, watching your innocent child sleep after she was nearly frozen to death by your own toxic flesh and blood, would you have called the cops right then for a quick fix? Or would you wait patiently in the shadows to drop a legal nuclear bomb on their entire miserable existence? Let me know in the comments below. The clock officially started ticking. 72 hours. I knew for a fact that Sullivan and Blair were planning a massive, catered backyard barbecue that upcoming weekend to celebrate their new home and show off the house to all of Blair's wealthy, snobby friends. I looked out the massive hotel window at the glowing city skyline below. They were busy sending out expensive party invitations, ordering champagne, and measuring for new curtains. Meanwhile, I was quietly preparing a legal delivery that they would never, ever forget. The next 2 days in that sprawling hotel suite felt like a strange, surreal vacuum suspended in time. The violent storm outside eventually broke, moving away from the city and leaving behind a crisp, bitterly cold autumn air that rattled the large glass windows of our room. But inside our penthouse, it was nothing but profound warmth, safety, and an endless stream of room service. I immediately took emergency paid leave from the construction site, telling my supervisors I had a family medical crisis to attend to. My only job right now, my sole purpose on this earth, was making sure Delaney felt safe again. I took her shopping in the high-end retail district downtown. We walked hand in hand down the wide, clean sidewalks. We bought her a brand new, heavy winter coat with a thick, faux fur-lined hood, several pairs of thick woolen socks, and a stack of new hardcover books to replace the waterlogged ones ruined in the rain. We spent hours just walking through the Natural History Museum, looking at towering dinosaur bones and ancient artifacts, losing ourselves in history to forget our present reality. I wanted to surround her with unshakable stability. Every single time she looked up at me with those big, hesitant, fearful eyes, quietly asking if we ever had to go back to that dark, miserable house with her grandmother and uncle, I held her hand tight. I looked her dead in the eye and promised her we were moving on to something much better, and that those people would never, ever be able to lock her out again. While I was busy healing my daughter's shattered sense of security, the flying monkeys began their coordinated assault. My phone started buzzing relentlessly on Wednesday afternoon, vibrating non-stop in my jacket pocket. It was the extended family. The aunts, the uncles, the distant cousins who only ever showed up when there was free food or fresh, juicy gossip to consume. Cora had clearly spent her days spinning a masterful, tragic narrative, painting herself as the elderly victim and me as the unhinged, abusive son. My Aunt Susan, Cora's younger sister, sent me a massive wall of text that took 3 full screens to scroll through. She told me I was deliberately breaking my mother's fragile heart. She said that packing up and hiding my kid in a hotel just because of a silly little misunderstanding over a broken lock was incredibly petty and childish. She wrote that Sullivan was stressing out about his upcoming wedding, that his blood pressure was dangerously high, and that I was selfishly ruining what was supposed to be the happiest week of his entire life. She ended the long, rambling message by saying I needed to swallow my ridiculous pride, come home, apologize profusely to Cora on my hands and knees, and maybe offer to pay for the backyard barbecue catering to make up for my terrible tantrum. I sat on the edge of the plush hotel bed, reading that text over and over. A silly little misunderstanding. That is exactly what they called leaving a vulnerable child out in a freezing, torrential storm for 5 hours. A simple misunderstanding. I did not reply. I did not try to defend myself because defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you is a waste of breath. I just took a high-resolution screenshot of her ridiculous message, saved it to a secure digital folder labeled evidence, and permanently blocked her number. I did the exact same thing for my Uncle Gary, who left a slurring, aggressive voicemail calling me an ungrateful brat who owed my mother everything. I blocked my cousin Mark, who sent me a mocking direct message accusing me of just being profoundly jealous of Sullivan's massive success and beautiful fiancée. I let them all talk. I let them all dig their own social graves, knowing they were aligning themselves with a sinking ship. Then, on Thursday evening, Sullivan made a fatal, arrogant error in judgment. He logged onto social media. I was quietly scrolling through my feed while Delaney watched an animated movie on the giant flat screen. And there it was. A public post from my brother, tagging Blair and Cora, set so that everyone on his friends list and beyond could see it. It was a photograph of him and Blair standing proudly on the front porch of my house. The very same concrete porch where my daughter had nearly frozen to death just 48 hours prior. Sullivan was holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, wearing a designer sweater, smiling that sickening, smug smile of his. Blair was leaning against him, flashing her massive diamond ring at the camera. The caption read, "Starting an amazing new chapter at our very own estate. Thank you so much to my incredible mother for handing down the family legacy to the right son. So glad to finally have the toxic dead weight gone from the premises so we can finally breathe and decorate. See everyone at the massive housewarming barbecue this Saturday. We are celebrating our $850,000 forever home." He even added a little house emoji, a champagne bottle emoji, and a diamond ring emoji. He was publicly claiming legal ownership of a property he did not own, bragging about a real estate value he had nothing to do with, and calling his own innocent niece dead weight for the whole world to see. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. I felt a cold, sharp, dangerous smile slowly spread across my face. I clicked the like button on his photo. I wanted him to see my name pop up in his notifications. I wanted him to think I was conceding defeat, bowing down to his newly established superior status. Because I knew something he did not. I knew that this photograph, this pathetic, filtered display of stolen wealth and unearned arrogance, was the very last picture he would ever take on that property as a free man. Saturday arrived with bright, clear, cloudless skies. It was the perfect, crisp autumn day for a lavish backyard barbecue. Delaney was safely enjoying a luxury spa day at the hotel with a highly recommended, licensed childminder I hired. They were getting their nails painted bright colors, eating chocolate-covered strawberries, and watching her favorite shows in the warm suite. She was safe, she was happy, and she was far, far away from the brutal carnage I was about to unleash on my former home. I took a long, hot shower and put on my very best tailored suit. It was a dark navy blue, sharp and professional. I did not want to look like the tired, muddy, overworked construction manager they always saw me as. I wanted to look exactly like the man who legally owned the ground they were standing on. I wanted to embody the authority of the limited liability company that was about to ruin their weekend. I walked out to the hotel valet stand, handed the attendant a generous tip, and took the keys to the brand new, jet black luxury SUV I had purchased just the day before. It was a heavy, powerful vehicle I had been quietly saving up for over a year, waiting for the right milestone to treat myself. Driving a rusty old pickup truck was fine for the construction site, but today felt like the perfect milestone for an upgrade. I drove slowly through my old, familiar neighborhood. The leaves on the trees were turning vibrant shades of orange and red. As I turned onto my street, I could immediately see the chaos. Cars were lined up all along the curb for an entire block. Blair's wealthy, superficial friends had all arrived in their leased European sports cars and expensive sedans. I could hear the loud, obnoxious pop music blaring from the massive speakers they had rented for the backyard. I could smell the rich, smoky scent of expensive catered barbecue drifting over the roof of the house. They were throwing a party fit for royalty on a peasant's dime. I did not park on the street. I slowly pulled my massive, heavy SUV right up the concrete driveway, inching past Blair's silver sedan. I did not stop there. I pressed my foot gently on the gas pedal and kept rolling right over the curb, driving directly onto the pristine, freshly manicured front lawn that Sullivan had just paid a premium landscaping service a fortune to trim and fertilize. The heavy, thick tires of my truck crushed the perfectly green grass, leaving deep, dark, muddy ruts trailing behind me. I threw the car into park right in the exact middle of the yard, crushing a bed of decorative flowers. I turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the crisp air. The heavy wooden front door, still showing the massive crack from where I had kicked it days ago, swung open almost immediately. Sullivan came storming out, his face flushed a deep, furious red. He was wearing a ridiculous, custom-embroidered chef's apron over a designer polo shirt, holding a pair of stainless steel grilling tongs. Several of the party guests, holding plastic cups of expensive craft beer and wearing fashionable autumn clothes, wandered out onto the porch behind him to see what the commotion was. Sullivan marched down the porch steps, pointing the metal tongs at me like they were a weapon. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" he screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "Are you out of your mind? You are destroying my lawn. Get that ugly piece of trash off my property right now, or I swear to God I will call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs." I stood there, leaning casually against the polished hood of my new truck, taking a moment to slowly adjust my suit jacket and straighten my tie. I looked at the crowd of confused, whispering guests gathering behind him on the porch. I looked at Blair, who had just stepped out, clutching a delicate glass of white wine, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "I am not moving anything, Sullivan," I said, my voice carrying clearly and calmly over the thumping music. "And you do not need to call the police to handle this." He let out a loud, theatrical, mocking scoff, turning to look at his wealthy friends to make sure they were witnessing his display of dominance over his pathetic younger brother. "Oh yeah? And why is that, you pathetic loser? Are you finally admitting you are crazy?" I smiled, a genuine, bright, terrifyingly calm smile. "Because I already called them for you. They should be pulling up right about now." Right on cue, as if choreographed by a movie director, the unmistakable, piercing sound of sirens wailed from down the street. Two heavy police cruisers turned the corner, their red and blue lights flashing brightly, reflecting off the windows of the parked cars. They pulled up swiftly, parking horizontally directly behind my SUV, blocking the driveway and the street entirely. The smug, arrogant grin on Sullivan's face vanished in a fraction of a second. Blair gripped her wine glass so hard her knuckles turned white, her mouth falling open. The murmuring crowd on the porch suddenly went dead, suffocatingly silent. The only sound was the loud pop music still echoing from the backyard and the crackle of the police radios. Officer Fletcher, a stern, veteran cop I recognized from a previous community safety event I had attended, stepped out of the lead cruiser. He adjusted his heavy-duty belt, put on his mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and walked deliberately up the driveway, his boots crunching on the pavement. Blair immediately stepped forward, switching her demeanor in a heartbeat, playing the fragile, terrified victim. "Officer, thank goodness you are here," she whined, her voice high and trembling. "This man is a disgruntled former tenant. He is my fiancé's troubled brother. He is trespassing on our property and trying to ruin our engagement party. Please arrest him and tow that car immediately." Officer Fletcher did not even look at her. He walked right past her outstretched arm. He walked right past me, giving me a brief nod. He stopped directly in front of Sullivan, pulled a thick, heavy manila folder from under his arm, and stared my brother down. "Are you Sullivan?" Officer Fletcher asked, his voice stern, deep, and echoing with unyielding authority. Sullivan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. He lowered the grilling tongs, suddenly looking very small. "Yes, sir. But like my fiancé just said, this is all a massive misunderstanding. That man right there is trespassing on my property." Fletcher ignored his plea entirely. He looked up past Sullivan, scanning the crowd on the porch. "Is Cora present on the premises?" Cora, who had been hiding near the doorway, clutching a floral napkin, slowly stepped forward. She looked pale, confused, and deeply embarrassed by the scene unfolding in front of her son's important guests. "I am Cora. This is my house, officer. Please just make my younger son leave. He is deeply troubled and he is trying to ruin a beautiful family gathering." At that exact moment, the passenger door of my SUV opened with a solid click. Montgomery, my corporate attorney, stepped out. He was dressed in a sharp, perfectly tailored three-piece suit, carrying a sleek, expensive leather briefcase. He walked over with measured, confident steps to stand right beside Officer Fletcher, looking exactly like a shark that had just smelled fresh blood in the water. "Actually, ma'am, this is not your house," Montgomery stated loudly and clearly, projecting his voice to ensure every single party guest on that porch heard him crystal clear. "This property belongs to a holding company named Apex Development LLC. Cora frowned, waving her hand dismissively, trying to brush it off as a minor clerical error. Yes, Harrison's little company. He paid a debt for me years ago. It is just a silly technicality on paper. I am the homeowner. I have lived here for decades." Montgomery opened his briefcase with a sharp snap and pulled out a stack of legally certified documents, each bearing heavy gold notary seals. He handed the top document directly to Sullivan, pressing it firmly into his chest so he was forced to take it with his free hand. "This is not a technicality, ma'am," Montgomery continued, his voice ringing across the silent lawn like a bell. "Apex Development LLC purchased this property out of foreclosure 5 years ago. Your son, Harrison, is the sole proprietor and chief executive of that LLC. You do not own this house. You have never owned this house for the past 5 years. You were a month-to-month tenant, living here entirely through the extreme financial charity of the actual legal owner." I watched Cora's face closely. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Her eyes went wide, darting frantically between me, the sharp attorney, and the official deed trembling in Sullivan's hand. The illusion she had built her entire life upon shattered in an instant. "Furthermore," Montgomery said, turning his piercing gaze to Sullivan, "by illegally changing the locks on the primary residence without providing formal legal notice, and by intentionally locking out a minor child in hazardous, freezing weather conditions, you have severely violated state tenancy laws and broken the implied lease agreement. You are hereby served with an immediate, 72-hour emergency eviction notice." Sullivan stared down at the piece of paper in his hands. I have never, in my entire life, seen a human being lose color so fast. The angry, flushed red of his face drained away in an instant, leaving behind a sickly, chalky, terrifying white. His hands began to tremble so violently that the thick paper rattled loudly in the quiet air. He dropped the grilling tongs, and they clattered noisily onto the concrete driveway. He tried to speak. He tried to formulate a defense, but his mouth just opened and closed silently like a fish suffocating on dry land. He looked over at me, his eyes wide with genuine, unfiltered terror. The grand illusion was shattered. The royal kingdom he thought he ruled was nothing but a fragile cardboard box, and I had just set it on fire while everyone he wanted to impress watched it burn. The party guests were whispering fiercely now. Some were already pulling out their phones, texting. Others were edging quietly toward the street, not wanting to be associated with a police raid or a humiliating eviction. Blair looked at Sullivan, her face twisting in pure disgust. "Sullivan, what on earth is he talking about? Tell them this is your house. Tell them right now." But Sullivan could not speak. He could not defend himself, because he knew, deep down in his hollow chest, that the eviction notice was only the very beginning of his nightmare. If you are enjoying seeing these toxic, arrogant people finally face the severe legal consequences of their terrible actions, please drop a W down in the comments below right now. That W stands for win, for those of you who have stuck with this story all the way to this point. I will personally go through and heart every single comment that has a W in it, and I will reply to as many of you as I can. Thank you for being here. Now let us finish them off. Montgomery was not done. He reached back into his leather briefcase and pulled out a second, much thicker envelope. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "The eviction is a civil matter," Montgomery announced, turning to look directly at Officer Fletcher, signaling the transition from a property dispute to something much darker. "However, during our routine background check on the property deed, we uncovered a significant, highly illegal criminal violation." Officer Fletcher stepped closer to Sullivan, resting his hand casually near the cuffs on his utility belt. "Sir, I need you to listen to me very carefully from this point forward. Montgomery pulled out a copy of a massive bank loan agreement, holding it up for everyone to see. 3 months ago, a home equity line of credit was forcefully opened against this property for the staggering amount of $150,000. The primary signature on the loan application belongs to Cora. However, the funds were wired directly, within 24 hours, into a private checking account solely controlled by Sullivan. An account that our forensic investigators found is used primarily to fund offshore sports betting websites. Cora gasped loudly, clutching her chest, her knees buckling slightly. What? No, that is absolutely impossible. Sullivan told me he was getting a small business loan for his new tech company. I never signed anything for the house. I do not even know how to do that online. He forged your signature, Cora? I said, stepping away from my truck and speaking up for the very first time since the cops arrived. I looked right at my mother, watching her entire world crumble into dust. He used your identity to steal $150,000 from a bank, thinking he could use the house as collateral. But he did not know he did not own the house. So now he has committed massive wire fraud, identity theft, and severe bank fraud. Blair let out a sharp, hysterical, ear-piercing shriek. She shoved her way past a shocked party guest, storming down the stairs and grabbing Sullivan's arm, digging her manicured nails into his skin. You lied to me? You told me you were a millionaire investor. You bought my ring with stolen money? Sullivan finally found his voice, though it was nothing more than a pathetic, trembling whimper. Blair, baby, please, you have to listen. I can explain everything. It was just a bridge loan. I was going to win it all back on the playoffs next month. Blair did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She ripped the massive, custom diamond ring off her finger and threw it directly at Sullivan's face with all her might. It bounced off his forehead, leaving a red mark, and landed somewhere in the crushed grass. You are a broke, lying, pathetic criminal, she screamed at the top of her lungs. She turned to her friends, who were standing there in stunned, horrified silence. We are leaving. Right now. Do not talk to him. Within 60 seconds, it was a mass exodus. Blair and her entire entourage of snobby friends were marching quickly to their expensive cars, starting their engines, and fleeing the scene, leaving Sullivan standing completely alone on the edge of the lawn, surrounded by half-eaten barbecue on paper plates and shattered dreams. Officer Fletcher pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp, metallic sound of the metal ratcheting open seemed 10 times louder than the music that had been playing just moments before. Sullivan, Fletcher said, his voice dropping an octave, leaving no room for argument. Turn around and place your hands firmly behind your back. You are under arrest for suspected bank fraud and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it immediately. Sullivan burst into tears. Real, ugly, heaving, pathetic sobs. He fell to his knees in the grass. He begged. He pleaded with Cora to tell the police it was a misunderstanding, to say she gave him permission. But Cora was sitting heavily on the wooden porch swing, clutching her chest, weeping uncontrollably as she watched her golden child get roughly pulled to his feet, handcuffed, and shoved into the back of a police cruiser. I walked slowly up the porch steps, my heavy boots thudding on the wood. I stood on the exact spot where Delaney had shivered in the cold just days ago. I looked down at my mother, broken and sobbing. You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever fits into your car, I told her, my voice cold, steady, and devoid of any sympathy. After that, my contractors are coming in to change the locks, and the police will be sealing this property as part of the federal fraud investigation. Do not ever attempt to contact me or my daughter again. The aftermath of that Saturday was swift, brutal, and incredibly decisive. Sullivan was denied bail by the judge due to the severity of the financial fraud, the overwhelming evidence of forgery, and the high risk of flight. He is currently sitting in a cold, concrete county jail cell, wearing an orange jumpsuit, awaiting a federal trial that will very likely put him behind bars for the better part of a decade. He tried calling me from the jail phone twice in the first week, begging for money for a lawyer. I let the calls go to voicemail, saved the pathetic audio recordings to a hard drive for a good laugh, and permanently blocked the facility's number. Cora had nowhere else to go. Her entire social circle, the ladies she played cards with and gossiped with, abandoned her the very second the scandal broke in the local news. Wealthy, status-obsessed friends do not want to be associated with a family under active federal investigation for bank fraud. I am not a monster, despite what she firmly believes. I instructed Montgomery to secure a tiny, cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a run-down, noisy part of town. I prepaid the rent for exactly 6 months out of my own pocket. It was the ultimate, crushing insult delivered as a calculated act of charity. She sits in that cramped, smelling apartment every single day, forced to realize that the son she treated like dirt for 35 years is the only reason she is not sleeping on a city park bench. As for me and Delaney, we never looked back. The week after the eviction was finalized and the police cleared the house, I listed that cursed property on the real estate market. Because of the location, it sold in 3 days for a staggering $900,000 in cash to a commercial developer who wanted to tear it down and build luxury condos. I could not have been happier to stand on the sidewalk, holding a cup of coffee, and watch the heavy yellow bulldozers roll in and smash that miserable place to dust. I took that massive pile of money and bought a beautiful, modern, open-concept home in a quiet, highly rated school district on the other side of the city. It has a massive backyard, a heated swimming pool, and most importantly, it has a heavy, reinforced steel front door that Delaney has the only spare key to. Her college fund is fully secured, and she is thriving beyond my wildest dreams. Her grades went up, her anxiety completely vanished, and she smiles so much more now. We spend our weekends swimming, grilling our own steaks, and living in total peace. Family is not determined by blood. It is determined by loyalty, respect, and basic human decency. The people who share your DNA are not entitled to your peace, your money, or your sanity just because you happen to share a last name. The moment you realize that you hold the power to walk away from toxicity, your entire life changes for the better. I used to think I was trapped in that house, playing a miserable part to keep the peace for my daughter's sake. But the truth was, I was the one holding all the winning cards the entire time. I just had to find the courage to throw them down on the table and walk away. Some of my extended relatives still call me a ruthless villain. They gossip and say a good son would have protected his mother's dignity, that a good brother would have bailed Sullivan out and paid his debts. They call me cold, calculating, and unforgiving. But I look at my daughter, safe, warm, and happy in her beautiful new room, and I know I did exactly what a father is supposed to do. I protected my own. So, I turn the final question over to you, the jury of the internet. Many of my relatives called me a monster for putting my own mother in a tiny, cheap apartment and letting my brother go to federal prison. But I did it to protect my 11-year-old daughter from their abuse. Did I go too far with my revenge? Or did they get exactly what they deserved for leaving an innocent child out in the freezing rain? Let me know your verdict down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you loved seeing this toxic family get what was coming to them, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible, dramatic stories just like this one. Share your own experiences with toxic families in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.